guys, welcome back to my channel. So I haven't made a book video in quite a while. I thought I would have all the time in the world here in Florida for the summer, but I'm working, I'm doing kind of the same stuff that I was up north. So I'm a lot busier than I thought I would be. I decided I should just sit down today and talk about some of the books I've read recently. I wanted to do a monthly wrap-up, but I want to talk about what I'm currently reading and some things from the past few weeks. So I thought I should just put them all together and tell you about some of the books that I've read recently, whether I loved them, whether I thought they were okay, and we'll also talk about some things that I'm currently reading. I've had a really good reading month so far. Most of the books that I've read have been 4 and 5 stars, so I'm really excited to talk about some of those. I think that's it, so let's just get into it. So the first book I wanted to talk about was The House in the Cerulean Sea. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's kind of an indie book, you know, no one really talks about it. But seriously, if you haven't read this book, you should get around to it. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. If you haven't heard about this, it is about a caseworker named Linus who is super tightly wound. He works for the department in charge of magical youth, and he is placed in different orphanages, essentially, for magical children, and he determines whether or not they are suitable for these children. And it follows him on his trip to a highly classified case on an island with, I think, 5 magical children that are all classified as dangerous. So he goes there, and the rest of the book follows his 2-week stay there, how it changes him, a little love interest along the way, and it was just such a great book. It was so heartwarming, it was easy to read. I cried reading the end of this, partly because it was so sweet and partly because I just didn't want it to be over. I'm usually not super into fantasy, so I kind of took a chance on this one because I've heard so many good things about it, and it was definitely worth my time. If you're even slightly interested in reading this book, you should check it out. It was the perfect thing to pull me out of my finals week depression. Next, I want to talk about The Ruins by Scott Smith. This was such a good book. I kind of stumbled upon it when I was looking for summer horror novels, and this fit that perfectly. If you don't know what it's about, it is about a group of American tourists in Mexico, and they go to these Mayan ruins expecting to find an archaeological dig, and they find something much worse. So I don't want to give away too much because I went into it kind of blind, only knowing the vague premise of it, and I think that worked really well. But it is a summer horror novel. It takes place in Mexico. It has a ton of body horror and a lot of disturbing moments. There were a lot of moments in this book that I really think are gonna stick with me for a long time. It was so gross, but in the best way possible. It is one of those books that from the beginning you know that things are not gonna go well for these people, and it's just watching it unfold in front of you is rough, but it was really, really well done. It definitely wasn't a perfect book, but I really enjoyed it. There were just so many bone-chilling original ideas in this that I feel I have to give it credit for that, and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. I don't have too much to say about this next book, but I read Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh, and this is my second book by her. I've also read My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and I loved this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it's tricky because I don't really know why I loved this book. Follows this older woman who's a widow, and she lives in this secluded cabin in the woods type situation, and one day she's on a walk and she finds a letter in the woods that says her name was Magda, nobody will ever know who killed her, it wasn't me, here is her dead body. And so our main character gets obsessed with this letter and is trying to figure out who was Magda, what happened, all of these things. And we're basically following her descent into madness because there is no evidence besides this note, and most of it is just her projecting everything onto people around her. And I thought it was really interesting. It was just a really good character study. Moshfegh's writing is so good, so I feel she could write anything and I would be interested in it. But I enjoyed this look into Vesta's mind because it was It was weird, it didn't really make sense at times, but I was just along for the ride. It was really well written, and I really enjoyed this book. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I want to talk about True Crime by Samantha Kolsniak. I think that's how you say it. This book was so good. I think it was my favorite book that I've read recently. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Recently, I have kind of felt like I was running out of horror to read, and I realized that I was very wrong. I am running out of mainstream horror to read. So this was kind of my first foray into indie horror. And I'm so glad that I checked this book out. I've heard some pretty good things about it, so I decided to get the audiobook and listen to it, and I think I listened to it in one day. I was obsessed with this book. It's a novella. It's about 100 pages. It was only like 3 hours long on audiobook. And if you love horror, you need to read this book. Big trigger warning though, like pretty much every page is insanely graphic. The story follows a young girl who has been abused by her mother her entire life. They live in this middle of nowhere southern town, and one day she just snaps and kills her. And the rest of it is her and her brother, Lynn, go on a cross-country murder spree, essentially. It just made such an impression on me, and only 100 pages. The characters were really well developed. Susie is our main character, and she's definitely a bad person. She does awful things, but since we've been following her for the entire story and we know how she grew up, it adds this extra level of humanity to her, and we can really see like how her perception of life is just completely skewed from the way she grew up. It explores cycles of abuse in families and how violence and abuse shapes a person. But before you read this, keep in mind a huge trigger warning for the entire book. Pretty much every page of this has something upsetting in it. I don't think the violence was overdone or unnecessary. I think it really contributed to the story and Susie's character development. Probably my only problem with this book is that I wish it was longer. And that's okay though. I think every page of this novella counted. I just wanted more because I really enjoyed the writing, and I thought this was just such a phenomenal book. I would recommend it to more experienced horror fans just because it's really intense. If you are new to horror and you read this, I think it could easily turn you off just because of how violent it is. It was highly disturbing, super thought-provoking, and I'm so glad that I checked it out. Next, I want to talk about The Library Book by Susan Orlean. I just finished this about a week ago, and oh my god, it was so good. Like, it was so good. It is a nonfiction about the Los Angeles Public Library fire, and the Los Angeles Public Library in general, and the library system in general. And it was just such a lovely book. If you are like me and you grew up spending so much of your time in libraries, I have such a fondness for all of the libraries that I spent my childhood in. And this book just took that and just made it so much bigger. I am aspiring to be a librarian or an English professor one day, so this book really, it just felt like it was perfect for me. Any book lover is gonna love this book. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm considering like maybe changing my rating to 5 out of 5 because I think about this book every single day. So maybe it is a 5 out of 5. I don't know. This book was just so sweet. It was so heartwarming. It also has a really interesting true crime aspect to it when it talks about the Los Angeles Public Library fire, I think in 1987 or something like that. So it has that, it has multiple like different threads running through it. So you're talking about the Los Angeles Public Library fire, you're talking about just the general history of the Los Angeles Public Library, and then you're also just talking about libraries in general and how influential they have been and how important they have been as not just a place to borrow books, but as a communal space that welcomes everybody. And it just brought up so many things that I've never thought about and made me appreciate libraries so much more than I already did, which was a lot. And I thought this book was perfect. So you know what? I'm changing my rating right here. 5 out of 5. This book was fantastic. Anybody that likes books is going to appreciate this. I'm getting a lot more into nonfiction lately, and I'm starting off with nonfiction that really aligns to my interests. So I've been reading a lot of like scary nonfiction about like scary events. I'm reading a book right now on the Donner Party, and I've read the library book, which obviously has something to do with my interests. And I've just really been enjoying reading nonfiction lately. I feel so smart. I love it. Anyways, the library book was so good. Please check it out. It's so good that I changed my rating to a 5-star in the middle of this video. So, 5 out of 5. Please check it out. You will not regret it. So the next book I wanted to talk about was Hex by Thomas Oldhoyvelt. I think that's how you say his name. It's a Dutch author, and this book is translated. This book was so good. I got the recommendation from Jordaline Reads, so thank you. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. It is about the town of Black Springs, who is haunted by this 17th century witch that was accused of witchcraft and put to death. And she walks the streets now. Her eyes and her mouth are sewn shut, and she haunts this town. She will just randomly show up in people's houses. She doesn't do anything, except for she whispers. You can't listen to her, because if you listen to her whispers long enough, you'll want to kill yourself. And when I first heard about this concept, I was like, this sounds a little silly. Like, whispering, making you want to kill yourself, and the eyes and the mouth sewn shut, like that's a little cliche. But it was really good, and it creeped me out a lot, because I mean, you know, just think about, it's the middle of the night, you're sleeping, you turn over, and there's just this fucking lady standing there, creepy as hell, eyes and mouth sewn shut, whispering. You can't touch her, you can't listen to her. That's so creepy. And I really liked this book. So it took this concept of the haunted town and kind of put it into the 21st century. So nobody that lives in this town is allowed to leave, because the Black Rock Witch is a secret. No one can know. She's a supernatural phenomenon. Like, it takes place in the 21st century, and nobody is allowed to know that she exists. So this town is controlled by the government. There's a tracking system for the witch, so they know where she is. And if you mess with her, if you try to remove her stitches or something like that, people in the town die. Just of like a heart attack or something like that. So that was kind of like a terrible explanation of the book, but like, you should check this out. It was really good. I thought this was such an original concept. It had a great like dark fairy tale vibe, a lot of really creepy moments. I didn't love the ending of this. I felt like it was a little rushed, and there were a few parts of the ending that I was like, where the fuck did that come from? Like, why did you have to include that? But it's okay. You know, horror endings are always can be pretty bad. So it was all right. The ending was fine. But there were enough really good parts in this book to balance out the ending, and it was really creepy, and I just thought the concept was super original, and I'm really glad I got around to it. And then I do want to talk about one book that I didn't enjoy. I finished it a couple weeks ago, and it was Kin by Keelan Patrick Burke. This is hard. I wanted to love this book so badly. I've heard some really good things about it from people. It just did not click with me. I rated it a 2 out of 5. It definitely wasn't the worst thing I've ever read at all. Like, I listened to the audiobook, and, you know, I wasn't upset that I read it or anything like that. It just wasn't it. I didn't connect with it the way I thought I would. It's essentially a Texas Chainsaw-esque horror that follows the cannibal family and the girl that escaped from them. It follows her kind of like PTSD and how she's dealing with this trauma and how she wants revenge. And then it's also following the cannibal family and their oldest son, who doesn't really like that they do this stuff and is trying to kind of break free from that, which I thought was a really interesting concept. but I don't think enough time was spent on him at all. And I don't really think that enough time was spent on the female protagonist either. I really wish that the author just took one of these storylines and decided to make it like the main point of the story, because I feel like there were a lot of characters kind of competing for the, I don't know, to be the main protagonist. I just found myself pretty disengaged with this book. I tried really hard. I re-listened to chapters a few times because I was like, what am I not getting? Like, why am I not enjoying this? I don't think it was a waste of time or anything. I definitely don't regret reading it. I just wasn't impressed. It's not what I thought it was gonna be. And I feel really bad because I thought I was gonna love this book and I've been meaning to get around to it for a long time. So, that's how I felt about Kin. They can't all be winners. Alright, and then last but not least, I wanted to talk about some things that I'm currently reading. First off, Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am such a basic bitch. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. Daisy Jones and the Six, 5 stars. Seven Husbands, 5 stars. Malibu Rising, I'm halfway through. I'm literally like exactly halfway through. It's looking like a 5-star so far. Potentially. We'll see. But, oh my god. This book is really good. I am just flying through it. It follows Nina Riva, who is a famous surfer. It takes place in the 80s, and it goes back and forth between the 80s and 50s as it follows her and her family history. She has 3 siblings that she's all really close with. They're all surfers, and it goes back and also follows her mom and her dad meeting. Her dad was a famous singer in the 50s, so it goes back and forth between the 80s and the 50s, which I really like. Those time periods in California, like, are great to read about. It's so fun. So I'm really liking it so far. This book, though, has made me, like, angrier than most other books I've read. Fucking Mick Riva, her dad, is such a piece of shit. And Nina's ex-husband or husband or whatever, Brandon, is such a piece of shit. It is, like, I am, like, sitting next to my girlfriend in bed reading this. I'm just, like, seething. And it's a good book, though, I guess, since it's making me feel these things. But yeah, Malibu Rising is fantastic so far. If you are reading it, let me know your thoughts so far. And I think that's all I have for you today. That's what I'm currently reading, some things that I've read recently. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a comment below if you have read any of these books. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of them. And yeah, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next video.